Welcome to DogTalk360 Ask a Vet podcast. In collaboration with the George Animal Hospital, our main aim of these educational sessions are the wellness of your dog, and we will cover a variety of relevant topics applicable to all dog breeds, ranging from habits and behaviors, fitness and exercise, vaccinations and parasite control, to chronic disease and other chronic conditions.
Hello and welcome to all our listeners. This is the very first episode of the Protection Canine Training Club podcast. I am your host, Dr. Christian Blichnout from the George Animal Hospital. In collaboration with the Protection Canine Training Club, we will be bringing you these episodes weekly, in which we will be discussing relevant topics regarding dogs, their health and their ownership. In our first episode today, we will be talking about vaccination, and I'm going to try and keep this simple and in a nutshell, so that you can listen it quickly and have a lot of info in a short time. Yeah, this is a very new project and a new venture for me as well, so bear with me and hopefully we will proceed smoothly and improve with every episode. Right, so vaccination. Okay, to try and make this as practical and simple to understand as possible, we will start off by discussing why vaccinate your animal. Then we will move on to how does vaccination work, the mechanism behind it. Thirdly, we'll discuss which vaccinations are important for your dogs, which ones are optional. And then fourth, we will talk about when your pet needs to be vaccinated. And lastly, we'll discuss a few myths and side effects of vaccination. Alright, so why is it important to vaccinate your animal? Number one, and which is also the most obvious reason, is that your pet needs to be protected against certain contagious and often fatal diseases. There's a few, and we won't be discussing these diseases in detail in this episode, but we'll definitely get to that in later episodes. There's a few of these diseases that can really cause a lot of trauma and also sadly a lot of deaths in especially your younger dogs, and especially puppies. I'm talking about things like your parvovirus, coronavirus, distemper virus, and a host of others as well. These viruses are dreadful, and when we see these animals coming in to our practice, there's always a big chance that there will be a sad ending. So this is one thing that you would want to protect your animals against. You don't want to lose that new puppy, that new bundle of life and excitement that you've just introduced into your house within the first year or two of its life. And secondly, you want to protect the people in your house against zoonotic diseases. Now, these are diseases that spread from animal to human and from human to animal. I'm talking here mainly about rabies in South Africa. That's your number one, and it's obviously fatal if people catch it. So that's the second thing that you want to try and prevent by vaccinating dogs. And the third thing is to prevent the spread of diseases. The rabies again is a good example where we've got areas in the country, for example the Garden Route or the Southern Cape, Western Cape, where we are at, that's generally rabies free, and just next to us in the Eastern Cape we have rabies outbreaks every now and then, or cases at least. And because we still vaccinate, we have what we call a herd immunity that prevents this virus from spreading easily within the population. And if we stop vaccinating because we believe that we don't have the issue of rabies in our area, we will very soon probably have it. So that is why we vaccinate. And I know there's a lot of opinions about this, but to me, this is the very important reason why we have to start vaccinating our pets if we don't do that already. So the second point is, how does the mechanism of vaccination work? And I think these days a lot of people know this because of the coronavirus pandemic that we are seeing worldwide. But I'll just quickly run through it and try and keep it as simple as possible. certain molecules from the pathogen. The pathogen now is the virus or the bacteria that's causing the disease. Certain molecules from this pathogen, called the antigens, are introduced into the body of a host, and then this triggers an immune system response. And the host immune system recognizes these invaders and then produces antibodies, like the little soldiers of the body, to react to these antigens. And then in the future, if the body is exposed to the same antigen again, it will recognize it early and prevent these antigens from spreading through the body and causing disease. It will launch an immune reaction and prevent a disease in the body. So that is the principle of it. And basically, we prime a body's immune system to recognize these diseases and then protect the body before it can even get the virus or the bacteria, whatever the case is. And the worldwide pandemic now with the coronavirus is a good example, where you have a novel virus. There's no vaccine, there's no protection from the body side. The body doesn't recognize the virus, and that's why we have such severe spread and symptoms and deaths. That is basically how a vaccination works. And then what we want to see is that the more animals that are vaccinated, the more you prevent the spread of these diseases. And we call this herd immunity. And if you have good herd immunity in a population, the virus can't move freely, or the bacteria, or whatever the case, and then it eventually fades. And that's exactly why we want to encourage people to vaccinate all their animals, even if they seem healthy and at low risk. So the third point that we're going to discuss is which vaccinations are important for dogs and which ones are optional. And I think at this stage, this is where a lot of people will come in and say, okay, we want to hear this because this is something we don't really understand. I will try to make it as simple as possible. We've got core vaccines and you've got your non-core vaccines. If you talk about core vaccines, these are the ones that we want you to use annually or vaccinate for annually. These are your non-optional or important vaccinations, and then your non-core ones are the optional ones, which differs from your situation, your pet's environment, the risk, etc. So the annual vaccinations, the core vaccines, there are essentially two very important ones that you need to try and take into consideration and make sure that your pet gets it. The one is what we call the 5-in-1 vaccination. This includes coronavirus, which is not the strain that we're seeing now. This is one that you see in pets. The coronavirus, distemper virus, adenovirus type 2, parainfluenza virus, and parvovirus. It's not important to know the details of these viruses as yet, just trying to illustrate that there's 5 viruses in one vaccine. And then your other vaccination would be the rabies that we also want annual vaccinations done for. So those are your two most important ones. You need to do them annually. Then your non-core ones, your optional ones, is for instance your kennel cough vaccination, which includes your Bordetella, which includes Bordetella bronchoseptica. And this essentially protects your animal against upper respiratory infections, and it's called kennel cough because it's something that's normally picked up in a kennel situation or in a population where there's a lot of animals in close contact. So obviously you'll only need to use this vaccination if your animal regularly visits the kennels, goes to doggy school, is boarding in a kennel or amongst a lot of dogs, or struggles with upper respiratory diseases. So this is a basic principle of core and non-core vaccinations. And then thirdly, when must your animal be vaccinated? Okay, so this is crucial because a lot of people get this wrong, and that is when you get the disease and when puppies and young dogs suffer. We see it a lot where people come in, the dog only had one vaccination, or it's 6 months old and it had no vaccinations, and people are up in arms why the dog's sick, and it's basically just because the vaccinations wasn't complete or never done. So, to make it as simple as possible, I'll start from the beginning of birth. So puppies, just as babies, needs to be vaccinated early on. Okay, initially they are protected by maternal antibodies, meaning antibodies that they receive from the mother, about 10% in her milk, in her blood, sorry, and about 90% from drinking her milk in the first couple of days. And these antibodies start to wane within the first couple of weeks after birth, and then you need to build an immune system in this new dog's body to protect it. So we try to catch that window where the mom's antibody starts weaning a bit, and then introduce the vaccination to try and stimulate the host's immune system. Okay, so at about let's say 6 to 8 weeks, you'll get your first vaccination. This would be the 5-in-1 vaccination. Then a booster needs to be given 4 weeks after the first one. So a second round of the same vaccination, your 5-in-1, repeated after 4 weeks. Coupled with this one at about this is about 10-12 weeks old, you'll also give your first rabies vaccination, and then a third booster is given at 14 to 16 weeks of age. So you repeat your 5-in-1 then, and your rabies again. So in essence, you give the 5-in-1 vaccination 3 times with a month interval between, and your rabies 2 times with a month in between. Sometimes some vets will only give the first rabies vaccination with your last 5-in-1 vaccination, and then you have to come back a 4th time for the second rabies vaccine. This basically then ensures that as your mother derived antibodies in the body starts weaning, that the host starts producing its own immunity. Because if you vaccinate early and you don't repeat it, there's still interference from the mom's antibodies, and as the mom's antibodies retreats, then the animal becomes at risk. And that's why a lot of young puppies get sick if they only had 1 or 2 vaccinations done. So this is very, very important, and I think this is almost the most important part of this podcast episode, is that initial vaccinations need to be repeated 3 times. Only then you have good protection. And then after that, it's only an annual booster of both your rabies and your 5-in-1 vaccination. Something that like your kennel cough vaccination, you can start giving at the age of 10 to 12 weeks. But like I said, this is only an optional vaccination and something that you can repeat yearly. Where it becomes really important and is if you want to put your animal in boarding kennels, because most kennels will require a kennel cough vaccination to try and ensure that these diseases don't spread within the kennels. Alright, so that is mainly how your vaccine schedule will work. So then we'll just move on to the last point, some myths about vaccination. The first one, my animal got sick after being vaccinated. This is unlikely. Modern day modified vaccinations don't cause disease, so you won't see the disease symptoms manifesting. This will most likely be due to infection from the natural disease or from whatever other syndrome or disease that puppy could have picked up, so not the vaccine itself. Then a lot of people believe that the animals are alone at home, they're not at risk, it's not needed to vaccinate. And yes, to a certain extent this is true, but unfortunately, some of these viruses, take for instance parvovirus, can live in the environment for years and up to, months, up to years, and your animal can still pick it up just from being in a yard or an area where an infected dog was months before. So not even being in contact still provides a risk. And I just want to repeat the whole thing about herd immunity, and that it's important that we try and build a barrier against vaccines in our communities. So that is a second myth. Another thing that people believe sometimes is that after the first vaccination, their puppies got parvo, so they think the vaccine is the problem. Again, this is not the vaccine, but the fact that the puppy hasn't had 3 consecutive boosters yet, and then if it gets exposed to the disease, it will catch it, or it can catch it at least. And then there's some side effects with vaccinations or with some of these vaccines, but it's very, very rare. To be honest, I can't even think of one case in the last 3 years that I saw. But sometimes it's possible that they could develop diarrhea, vomiting, some facial swelling, or feel a bit lethargic after vaccination, but this is very, very rare. Something that you do sometimes see is an injection site reaction, which makes a little hard spot under the skin, but that's more a reaction to the needle than to the vaccine itself. So just to wrap it up, if you look at all that we just discussed, there's very little reason not to vaccinate. There's so much benefit from vaccinating your dogs, and I've just seen so many sad stories in our hospital where we spend days trying to save animals that have been infected with one of these very, very nasty diseases. Sometimes it's a happy ending, but a lot of the times it's a terrible struggle and a traumatic experience which can end in a sad story after a couple of days or a week or two, and it's something that could have been avoided. So I would say, from my point, purely from a scientific viewpoint, not taking into consideration all other opinions, just purely from a scientific viewpoint, I would definitely advise that you stick to advised vaccination schedule with your dogs. All right, this is it for today's episode. Next time we will be talking about deworming. So I hope to see you back again then. Cheers.
For more information, visit our websites dogtalk360.co.za and georgevet.co.za. Also follow and subscribe to our social media platforms for DogTalk360 and George Animal Hospital. DogTalk360. Best advice, best training, better dogs.